Hello, everyone, and welcome to the weekly Game Hump. We're live. We're live on a Wednesday. That means we're in the middle of the week. That means it's Hump Day. That means it's Game Hump Day. And we are here, the Game Huggers. This week, I am joined by a good friend named Ryan. Ryan, how you doing?
I am fantastic this evening. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. I got a bit of a cold. I was sneezing like crazy earlier, and now I'm just kind of paying my dues for all that sneezing. I think that's what
Yeesh.
happens whenever I get into a mode. We're doing some housework, and I kicked up a bunch of dirt or dust, I should say, and now I'm all sneezy.
Are you
But
sure it's not the crystal meth?
not this time. Usually, I would
Not
say
this time.
yes.
Well,
Not
good.
this. Yeah, not this time. And
Hey, buddy, I've been rooting for you every time.
getting over that crystal meth
Yep.
addiction
Getting
of
over
mine.
getting over that crystal.
No, but I am enjoying a nice a Slurpee here of some eggnog. Sauce is always
Oh,
tasty. Mmm, tis the season.
taste eggnog.
It's delicious. I love it. So
That's
this week on the Game Hump, we're gonna go ahead and talk about fighting games. We're gonna talk about games that say round one, fight.
fight.
Round one, fight. And this can kind of just jump right into anything we want to chat about fighting games. When did we first play our very first fighting game? What are some of our favorites? Our own little histories with fighting games in general. I think that fighting games are a huge part of the history of video games, a genre that, in my opinion, is still one of the best out there. Even if current generation consoles maybe don't support that genre as well as it used to, I still think it's a huge part of gaming in general. I mean, I, I swear, whenever I have game nights with friends, one of the games that we get together and play is a fighting game of some sort, just because they're absolutely fantastic and there's so much fun and so much competition and just so much to it. So, Ryan, why don't you tell us a little bit about your history with fighting games? Oh man, you froze up. You got a blue screen. Are you there?
Yep, I'm still here.
Oh, did you hear anything I just said?
No, I missed it. I'm sorry.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
You missed it like my sound wasn't working?
Yeah, it kind of froze up a little bit.
Uh-oh. Okay. I was just saying that why don't you give us a little bit of a history of your like first fighting games and some of the games that you grew up playing?
Okay. Yeah, the very first one, honestly, that I ever played was Street Fighter 2, because I think that's one of the first that anybody played. Um, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the music. I loved the characters. I loved um, the boss battles. I was actually kind of disappointed that um, you couldn't play as the boss characters because they were so epic. And all I really wanted to do was be able to do Vega's moves because jumping off of that screen that he did was just absolutely amazing. It was so much fun.
Yeah, like the fence in the background.
Yep, yep,
He'd jump up that and climb up it and then jump onto you. That was a good move to have. Yeah, they wound up actually like releasing a whole separate well, not expansion, but a sequel to that. That the only thing that was new about it was that you could play as the bosses.
yeah. And that was that Street Fighter 2 Turbo
Champion Edition.
Champion Edition? Yes, for the Genesis,
Yep.
and I did have that one. Um, I actually had a Genesis, and it was a little bit weird for me going from the Super Nintendo to the Genesis with the um, three-button controller.
Yeah.
It definitely made it a different game, and
Yeah.
I would always change my controller layout. Any game, actually, I've changed my controller layout where the leftmost buttons are always the high attacks.
Interesting. Hmm.
and the rightmost buttons are the weaker attacks because, um, well, I find myself using a lot of combos, but I use the high attacks more for the special moves, so they were
Sure.
just more easily accessible.
Huh. That's interesting. Yeah, Champion Edition. I think that got it was 91 or 92 when that came out in the arcades. And right around when Champion Edition came out was when the original came out on the Super Nintendo. The Street Fighter 2 came out on the Super NES. And Champion Edition actually came out on both the Sega Mega Drive / Genesis and the PC Engine. The PC Engine version came out initially, I think, early '93. Like it was the first sequel to Street Fighter 2 to get released. It was actually on the PC Engine. It was a really, really good version. Great conversion of that game. And actually, I thought it outplays the Genesis version in almost every way. It's got better music, and the voices are way better. The voices on the voices on the Genesis Special Champion Edition is actually really bad. Like
Yeah,
they're so muffled, so gargled.
yeah, they were. The sound was actually really bad on that Genesis Champion Edition.
Yeah. Eggnog. Yeah, Street Fighter 2, man. That's just, I mean, that's like the king of the hill.
Yep.
It's so good. I mean, if it wasn't for Street Fighter 2, who knows if there would have ever been any kind of a market for fighting games. I would imagine there probably would never have been a Mortal Kombat, no Samurai
Yep.
Showdown. A lot of the developers from Capcom's Street Fighter 2 team wound up working for SNK and the Neo Geo lineup. So they were responsible for the Fatal Furies, the Art of Fightings, World Heroes, Samurai Showdowns. A lot of those games that came out for the SNK fighting system, the Neo Geo, were probably people that had worked on Street Fighter 2. It's kind of crazy.
That's awesome. I didn't even know that.
Yep. Yep. I mean, SNK, when the Neo Geo initially came out, it was mostly just arcade style games. There were some beat 'em ups, some shoot 'em ups, side scrollers like Magician Lord, a few other games like that. And then when SNK got some bigger developers from Capcom to come over, they came out with Fatal Fury 1, The King of Fighters is what it was called, and Art of Fighting. And then they were like, well, the arcades were just eating those games up. I mean, they were just so much more popular than their other types of arcade games. So they're like, more fighting games. Come on, keep bringing them. So there was just fighting game after fighting game on the Neo. But yeah, a lot of those same people. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I loved Samurai Showdown. That was a funny story about that one is I was living in Hilbert, Wisconsin, with my parents.
Is that a real place?
Yeah,
Hilbert?
It's by New Holstein. It's the area where the Tecumseh engines were made, like Tecumseh lawnmowers. But anyway, and we were living in temporary housing because we had purchased a house, but we couldn't move in there for like a month. And so we were living in temporary housing in Hilbert. And the laundromat that we did our laundry at, I didn't mean for that to rhyme. I'm terribly sorry.
Laundromat that you did your laundry at?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My bad. But they actually had a Samurai Showdown arcade machine inside.
That's awesome.
It was awesome. And my mom had plenty of quarters, so I would just plug away at that. And it was super hard and tons of fun.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah, Samurai Showdown. Gosh, I think the first time I played it, it was at an arcade downtown here. But there was another spot that had a copy of it too. I can't remember where it was though. I want to say it was maybe in the mall in Wausau. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they had a copy of it too. But yeah, Samurai Showdown. I mean, that was like the first Neo Geo fighting game that really like got them on the map. It kind of like it was a lot of people considered like Fatal Fury really good, and Art of Fighting really good, and World Heroes, pretty good. But they were just, kind of just copies of Street Fighter with little unique ideas and concepts here.
Yeah.
Samurai Showdown was a weapons-based fighting game. It was
Yep.
sprites. It was hand-drawn, anime-looking characters with fatalities. It was like
Yeah.
a little bit of Street Fighter, a little bit of Mortal Kombat, and like really awesome action. And the whole concept of the zooming back and forth, and like this, whatever they were on when they made that game, they were full of like lots of innovative ideas, and it was really cool.
Hmm.
Samurai Showdown's great. To backtrack a little bit, the very first fighting game that I had ever played was in an arcade in a restaurant here in town called Pine Ridge, which doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
But it was called Yai R Kung Fu, and it was a one-on-one fighting game. You had two buttons. I think it was jump and attack. I don't know if there was really any special moves that you could do, but this was made by Konami. It was a Konami fighting game.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Did the code work?
No, that was before the code, believe it or not. It actually did wind up coming out for the Famicom in Japan. I got a copy of that. It's just as hard on the Famicom as it was in the arcades.
Nice.
But I remember wasting a lot of quarters on that, and I was really into it because I thought it was so cool to see a one-on-one fighter. Because almost any other types of games that I had ever played, side scrollers, role-playing games or whatever, I don't even know if I've ever even played a role-playing game up to that point. This is probably like 1985, maybe even earlier, maybe 84, 85. I'm talking here. And any fighting or any games that I've ever seen, brawlers or action side scrollers or anything, it's usually most enemies are one or two hits, and that's it. And this game, it was one-on-one, and they had a power bar and you had a power bar, and it was like equal or even less than equal. You're the underdog in each fight because every bad guy has a different weapon or has like special skills or could shoot fireballs or like all these things, and you're just a dude with kicking. Like it's like how can you do this? And I thought it was a lot of fun. It was really neat. The sprites were these tiny little sprites on the screen, probably no more bigger than like Super Mario Brothers or something like that. And the graphics were good. The graphics were really cool at the time. And I remember going to that restaurant probably once or twice a month-ish, and I'd always play that game. I'm like, okay, I'll eat my dinner, and then my mom gives me $1, and I get to play 4 games, or whatever. And one time we went there, and I want to say this is probably 2 or 3 years later. It was like 86 or 87. And they had another arcade machine. And I remember walking in there and looking where Yai R Kung Fu usually was, and it wasn't there. It was some other games, and it was like a racing game and another game next to it. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. And my mom's like tugging my arm. She's like, you got to come and eat. And I'm like, but there's different ones. There's different games. Oh my God. And
oh no.
So I had to sit down and eat. And then finally, after I like scarfed down everything I had, my mom like, here's $1, and I ran into where the arcade games were, and there was Street Fighter 1. And I know a lot of people rag on that game because it is very primitive compared to all the other Street Fighter games. The controls are very difficult. But man, the first time I had seen Street Fighter 1 in the arcades, those sprites are gigantic. The music was awesome. Everything about it was a whole level higher than what I had seen with Yai R Kung Fu. And I loved it. I thought it was so cool looking. The graphics aren't amazing by today's standard, and it's definitely not even, late 80s, early 90s, it probably wasn't that spectacular, but I was really into it because I was so used to Yai R Kung Fu that this Street Fighter game I thought was out of this world.
Yeah, it really was. I remember because the first game that I ever played was Street Fighter 2. And I loved it, and I always wondered about Street Fighter 1. I was like, it has to exist, right? And I grew up.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, it is hilarious because most people haven't played Street Fighter 1. They have no idea what it is. And thinking I hit the jackpot, I played Street Fighter, what was it, 2010 for the NES? Yeah, and you play as Ken, I believe. Yeah. And you're shooting stuff, and I'm like, nope, this wasn't the game. This was not Street Fighter 1.
Nope.
Which actually made me really sad because I was kind of excited to play it, but not a bad game in its own.
It isn't, yeah, that's the thing about it is it isn't a horrible game.
No.
Street Fighter 2010, The Final Fight, is not a terrible game.
Yeah. The final fight against enemy.
Against enemy. Yeah,
Yes.
it's not bad. It's just not
No,
a
it's not bad, but
Street
it's
Fighter.
not a Street Fighter game at
It's more
all.
of a Mega Man game where you're kind of
Yeah.
action side scrolling where you have bosses that you fight and you get to jump all over the place and shoot it and get your butt kicked
Yeah.
because it's really, really hard.
Yeah, it was really hard.
Yep.
Like, no, where's Blanca? I just want to see Blanca. I don't even care. Um, but
Where's
yeah,
Chun-Li?
yeah. Where's Chun-Li? Come on, she's hot in all of her 16-bit glory. Um,
She kicks
but
high.
oh yeah, but no, I finally got to play the original Street Fighter at a pizza shop in the Dells.
Nice.
Yeah, we my friends and I walked into this random pizza place. We were trying to get food, and my eyes got super wide because I was like, "That just says Street Fighter. I need to play this right now." And my friends are like, "No, we're gonna get pizza." And I'm like, "Screw you guys. I'm playing this. I'm playing this until I beat it." And I actually did. It was awesome.
That is
And
awesome.
oh my goodness, it was so fun because it was like this is the game. This is the game that Street Fighter, all of Street Fighter 2 is based off of. Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Street Fighter 2, just oh my goodness, so many renditions of Street Fighter 2.
Yeah, I know. Street Fighter 2 went on for a while. It
Yeah,
was Capcom couldn't
long,
go to 3.
long time. Super Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo.
Yeah. Yeah, and there was like Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo X or something like that. It was like the extreme fast one or something. I don't know what it
Yeah,
was.
there were so many.
It was weird. Yeah, yeah, Street Fighter 1, it's like you have Ken and Ryu, who are the two playable characters who are identical playable characters.
Yeah,
And all the other characters that you fought against, I think there was one big American dude named Joe. And there was Adon and Sagat and
yep,
Gen was in it, and a few other
yep.
characters, really cool characters. I mean, they had that like 80s mystique to them that was kind of spooky and like mysterious, and ooh, they're ninja, or whatever.
And Sagat before his eye patch and scar,
Yep.
which Ryu gave him, which
Yes.
is
So,
awesome.
yes, very cool. Yeah, and I actually love the soundtrack on the original Street Fighter game. I think it's got a cool soundtrack. The music's really good.
Yeah.
And fast forward a few years later, when I finally got my Turbo Graphics CD system, and I saw a game that was released on it, was actually the first ever CD-based video game on a console ever, is Fighting Street. And I was like, well, what the hell is Fighting Street? And when I picked it up, because I wanted to have it, I'm just like, it's an inexpensive game, I want to play it. And then sure enough, 1987 Capcom flashes on the screen, and it's like, oh my god, this is Street Fighter 1. And
That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah, it's really cool. And that game plays exactly like the arcade. It has all the same faults, it has all the same merits, which maybe were few, but it's basically the exact same game with really brilliant music. The soundtrack on Street Fighter or Fighting Street for the TurboGrafx CD is absolutely fantastic. I think that's one of my favorite CD soundtracks from like retro games. It's so good. Such a good soundtrack.
Awesome.
But Street Fighter isn't the only series that's ever come out that had a lot of like. Somebody's commenting. Hold on. Oh, it is 9 o'clock. Okay, somebody was asking if it started yet. Of course it started yet. Anyway,
It is streaming, right?
it is streaming. We are
Am
streaming.
I on the air?
What?
What?
Are we on?
Oh no.
No, but it's interesting when Street Fighter 2 became such a big deal, there was like all of these Street Fighter clones that came out. Like everybody was like,
Yes.
we need to do a fighting game. And it's like, why? And it's like, well, because they're really hot right now. We need more fighting games. And I remember before Street Fighter 2 had launched on the Super Nintendo, there was all these other fighting games that were coming out that were just kind of generic knockoffs. But they were actually, there were some really, really fun games. There were a lot of knockoffs that came out around that same time, and it was like if you went to the rental store, which is where I played 90% of my games when I was a kid, I rented them, and I would go there, and Street Fighter 2 was always rented out. So it was like, oh, what do I do? And I remember a fighting game called Power Moves on the Super Nintendo.
Power Moves.
Power Moves. It was.
I don't remember that one.
Can you think of any cheesy like? Just there's all these. I mean, Doomsday Warrior isn't a terrible game. It was actually pretty fun, but they always had something that like wasn't exactly how Capcom would have done it or how Capcom had it. They always would do these like silly little, like they'd add a jump button, or there'd be like one punch button and like an up kick button, and like the combo moves wouldn't be done using any kind of directionals or anything like that. But God, there was a lot of really weird ones. Like Street Smart was one of them. Geez, there was a Ranma half fighting game. There was Fighting Masters on the Genesis. That was bad.
Fighting Masters, was that one with like a bunch of kung fu people?
I think so. And there was like weird monsters in it too. There was a bunch of weird ones.
Yeah, there were a bunch of weird ones that all spawned off of the Street Fighter series, and well, I mean, even some of they were original ideas, but like, I mean, for crying out loud, Killer Instinct, Primal Rage, Clay Fighter, like
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Tournament Fighters.
Yes, Tournament Fighters. Yep.
Tournament Fighters is awesome. Tournament Fighters is
bad. It wasn't bad.
It's one of those weird games that when it came out, they decided to try to make it cross-platform onto every system.
Yeah.
And they had three different
failed.
The three different development teams working on each one. So they didn't even really like communicate with each other or whatever. I don't know how Konami did this, but they had a group of people do the Nintendo version, and then a group of people do the Genesis version. And then apparently their A team was on the Super Nintendo version, because the Super Nintendo Tournament Fighters is an absolutely wonderful game.
Yeah, it wasn't bad at all.
It's like it's a very early, I think it came out either right around the time of Samurai Showdown or right before it, but it was a real early weapons-based fighting game.
It felt like that. It really did.
And it had turbo modes in it and stuff like that. So it was a good competitor, honestly, to Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I don't think it was as good, but it was a really good competitor. But yeah, I mean, Clay Fighter and like you were mentioning, Killer Instinct, the Mortal Kombat series. Did you ever play any of those really horrible, tacky, ultra-violent fighting games that came out right after Mortal Kombat was a big deal? Like Time Killers?
Yes.
Now that's a terrible game.
It was awful. Funny story. My parents were kind of strict, so I wasn't allowed to play the Mortal Kombat games or any of the other super violent ones, but my friends had them, so of course I played them.
Nice. Yeah, Time Killers was the game where I saw it at like an arcade.
Time Killers.
And I had to throw money into it because it was so ridiculous. I just like watching it, and I'm like, I need to at least try this. And oh man, there was like instant fatalities before the fight would even start. You could like hit all three punch buttons or something crazy like that, and it would do an instant fatality and just cut off their arms and legs. It was like, holy crap, this is awful. But yeah,
bad.
Let's see if we can name all the Street Fighter games. Okay, we got Street Fighter.
Yep.
Then you had Street Fighter 2.
Yep. Then
Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition.
Yep.
Then Street Fighter 2 Turbo.
Yep. And then
Super
Street Fighter 2 Turbo.
But just Super Street Fighter 2. Then there was Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo.
Yep.
Then I believe after that there was either a Street Fighter 2 Turbo X, or they went to Street Fighter Alpha, and I don't know if there was an X or not. I can't recall.
Let's see, after Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo,
there was a version on the 3DO that came out of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and I think it was just called the 3DO. This is actually something interesting. We discussed it a couple of weeks ago when we did our TurboGrafx episode, and the guy on our show, Patrick, he was talking about how he got out of gaming pretty much in the mid 90s because he had a Genesis and a Super Nintendo and he had an NES and he had all these things and he traded it all in, all of his games and all of his collections and everything to get a
Oh
fucking
no.
to get a 3DO because of
Panasonic 3DO?
yeah, the $700 3DO
Oh
in 93 or
no.
94. Yeah.
That
And
hurts.
when he got a copy of Street Fighter 2 Turbo and he was like, this is really great. And it actually does play really well. The controllers are not the best for it at all, but it's pretty good. I mean, it was like an early version of a PlayStation or Sega Saturn, which, you know, those systems can handle a Street Fighter 2 Turbo or Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo.
Right.
But yeah, the sacrifices he made to get that though are out of this world. Like to even think about what he must have gotten rid of. Yeah. So yeah, that was actually one of the earlier games that came out on the 3DO. They tried to make it like it was this ultimate multimedia system. It did the FMV games, it did like
Yeah.
the big 3D polygons, and it could handle arcade games. So they had Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. They also had Samurai Showdown 2. And that might have been it. I can't even remember if there was any. Oh, Way of the Warrior. Way of the Warrior.
They really had that on there.
Yeah.
Nice.
Way of the Warrior was a 3DO exclusive, I believe. But
It
yeah.
wasn't. Yeah, that game sucked. I remember playing that. That was
It had
awful.
all white. The soundtrack was made by White Zombie. What could go wrong?
I do love White Zombie, but that's another topic.
Yeah.
But no, and off topic, but the 3DO system itself, like the games that came out for it, they weren't all awful.
No, they weren't. They were just overpriced.
Fun. They were super overpriced. And I remember my my best friend's older brother actually saved up and got a 3DO for like a week and then returned it because it was so expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
He was super excited and he wanted to be on like the cutting edge of gaming.
Right.
And just wasn't there.
Yeah, I remember that time really well, actually, when 16-bit was starting to it wasn't like fading away, but everyone was so eager to like find the next thing. And
yeah,
everyone wanted to jump on that so quickly. And it's just like, why? Like 16-bit is perfect. Just leave it alone. Like we don't need to sit here and figure out what the next thing is going to be. I mean, Sega made huge mistakes with that, trying to come up with their CD add-ons and their 32X add-ons and all these things. But gosh, yeah, the 3DO was out, the CDI was out, the Atari Jaguar was out, and they were all like, "Oh, this is the next thing. This is really the next
CDI
thing."
Was just awful.
The CDI is a joke as far as being a system. It's more of an interactive DVD player, or not even a CD, video player.
Yeah.
But for what it did have, and it's not much, but it did have some pretty nice conversions of things like Dragon's Lair and Space Ace.
Yeah.
And it had a really awesome exclusive game on it called Burn Cycle that is more of a point and click real-time event type game.
Okay.
And I don't know why I'm sitting here even defending the CDI, especially in a fighting game episode. But it is like, I couldn't imagine jumping into that, like thinking like, oh, I have a Super Nintendo, I'm going to trade it in and get a CDI. Like those like 10 people that did that must feel so ashamed. They probably never got video games again because of how burned they felt.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine coming back from that.
At least with the 3DO, they had plenty of arcade games, plenty of different types of games. I mean, Road Rash came out on it. There was a John Madden game. There was The Seventh Guest. There was tons of computer games, and EA Sports was like all over that system, or Electronic Arts, I should say. Back when they could make video games, was all over that system when it initially came out. So, there was a lot of good things for it, but man, the prices that you had to pay for those, $700 for a system,
unbelievable.
$50 more for a controller, and then $50-$60 a game. Holy crap. I couldn't imagine.
And didn't the controllers plug into each other?
They did. They do a daisy chain effect because the system itself only has one controller port. And like, it's a really stupid idea when 20 years later, we can say it was a stupid idea. You should just had controller ports on the system. But at the time, I can kind of see like someone thinking like, this is a really great idea because all you need to do is buy more controllers. I mean, it's basically
Yeah,
like you can have an infinite number of controllers, up to 8 players. I mean, like
right.
the 3DO game Twisted is 8 players. You can play with one controller, you can play with 8 controllers, and you just daisy chain them together. It actually works really well. And there was some other systems like the TurboGrafx came out with one controller port as well. You had to buy a multi-tap, and that sucked. Like
True.
it restricted a lot of things. You could buy another controller, but you couldn't. You needed a multi-tap, and it was like awful. But a 3DO, you could just connect the controllers together and daisy chain them like you're trying to get an extension cord across the room or whatever.
And then you can cuddle with your friends that you've always wanted to.
Yeah, and then when you're about to get when you're when you're when you're when you're finally about to beat your friend, they can unhook your controller from their port because it's right in there. It's right there in front of them. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm sorry. I just pulled away a little bit. That sucks. You lost.
So okay. So before we jump out of the 16-bit era, which system, in your opinion, of those systems had the best fighting games?
Ooh. Well, in my mind, it's definitely the Super Nintendo. Because it had so many variations of Street Fighter. It did have Clay Fighter.
It did. I think the Genesis also got a release of Clay Fighter, though.
Yeah, I think it did.
Clay Fighter 2 was on the Super Nintendo as exclusive, though. I don't know if that was a good game or not. But
I don't even remember. But so obviously not that great. But yeah, I remember the Super Nintendo had a lot more fighting games, I think, than the Genesis. I think the Genesis had a lot more platformers than the SNES.
The Genesis did. It's interesting. I did not support Sega at all until like way after the Genesis had happened. I was pro Nintendo all the way. I didn't care about the Sega at all. And the older I'm getting now, the more I'm starting to realize how much I actually really missed out on that. I don't think there was as many fighting games on the Genesis as there was on the Super NES, but there were some really good ones. I think that the original the original Mortal Kombat was more fun on the Genesis than it was on the Super NES.
Yeah,
probably just because of fatalities. I don't know. I mean, that was a big deal at the time, and it was silly to censor a game like that. It should just not have ever been released. Like, I mean, why even come out with it? But there was some good ones, and one of the ones that I actually enjoy that a lot of people don't was Eternal Champions on the Genesis.
Yes,
that was a pretty awesome fighting game.
That wasn't a bad game.
Yeah, it was. I don't know if they were necessarily trying to make an equivalent of like Killer Instinct or Mortal Kombat or something.
It was kind of a hybrid.
It was weird. Like, I don't even know how to explain it to people.
Fun.
It was really fun. I thought the play control and the gameplay actually felt more like a Street Fighter game, but it had dark and eerie spookiness to it. There was like really creepy backgrounds, and there was fatalities, and some of the characters were definitely not PG. There was like darker characters, even though they were just regular like anime looking sprites or character sprites. I really did like Eternal Champions. I think it's a fun game. I play it every once in a while still. And it's got some interesting creepiness to it, being more geared for adults, yet it still had good gameplay. I don't know if a lot of people really got into that one, though. I don't think it was very popular, but it was a cool game.
Yeah, sadly it didn't take off, but it was like as a franchise, I think it could have. Because it was different enough. It wasn't quite Mortal Kombat, but it wasn't quite Street Fighter.
Yep.
It was somewhere in between, and it was fun in its own right.
Yep.
That was a rental for me. I didn't ever own it. But
yeah, I think at one time I used to have, or at least I knew someone who did have the sequel. There was an Eternal Champions that did come out for the Sega CD, and I think it was more of a sequel than a reboot or a remastered version of it or anything like that.
Really?
Yeah, it was really cool. It had the CD music and everything, and Red Book audio. It sounded really nice. Some nice advances there from the original Genesis version, including I think some like FMVs and things like that, or cutscenes or whatever. But
Nice.
yeah, I don't remember it too well. I'll have to look that up and see if there's more to that one or how much that costs, because I'd like to play it again. Just chatting about it makes me want to play it. Actually, it's kind of funny.
Nice.
Um, but yeah, I think that in any way, shape, or form other than Mortal Kombat and other than Eternal Champions, all of the versions of Street Fighter played better on the Super Nintendo than they did on the Genesis. There was Street Fighter 2 Alpha, or no, I'm sorry, Street Fighter Alpha 2 came out on the Super NES, which is really odd because
Yeah.
that was one of the last games to come out for the Super NES. I believe that was in 97 or 96 or 97. It was really strange because Nintendo had worked on getting the rights for a Street Fighter game because they Capcom and I don't even know if there was necessarily a drought of fighting games or anything like that, but Nintendo didn't have any fighting games coming out for the N64 when it first came out, outside of like Killer Instinct, which was their big franchise at the time. So Nintendo got the rights to produce their own Street Fighter Alpha 2 copy of that, the arcade game that at the time was really hot. And then instead of bringing it onto the N64, they actually came out with it on the Super NES, and I have no idea why. But I don't know how it would have played on the N64 anyway. I'd have liked to have seen it, but it never happened. So oddly enough,
No,
and
I'm sorry, I forget. Was um there was a Killer Instinct game for the SNES? Am I
there was, and it was
There
actually
was.
a really good game. Like it plays really well.
Yeah.
It wasn't as flashy as the arcade game, but it plays really
No.
well.
And was there I know Primal Rage, there was a version on the Sega 32X,
Yep.
which was awful, but
Yeah. It's not a good game anyway. I believe that also came out on the Super NES.
I thought it did, and
Yeah.
it was bad too.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I mean, don't get me wrong. There's probably just as many horrible fighting games as there are really good ones on all
Oh
the
yeah,
systems, because the Genesis
100%.
has a bunch of bad ones. The Super Nintendo had things like Rise of the Robots. Do you remember that one?
I don't.
Holy shit. You should play it. It's terrible.
I will look it up.
You would love it. No. It's a bad fighting game. It was interesting because I believe Acclaim put a ton of time and effort into it. But they put everything into the storyline, the digitized graphics. In the beginning of the game, it actually had an FMV sequence. I don't know if you full motion video,
Yeah.
where there was like this ship taking off and it was flying and everything was kind of all 3D looking and stuff. And they had pushed it as a CD game on a cartridge, because you'd only seen those
Oh.
type of things in CDs at the time, and it was actually on a Super Nintendo game like that. But once you got to the actual fighting portion of the game, it was bad. It was like,
Mm.
wow, you guys focused on the wrong thing. It could have been cool if they had taken more time. There was a sequel that came out on the PlayStation and the Saturn. I think it was just called Rise 2 or something like that. And boy, that sucked just as bad. It was kind of crazy. But yeah, I think that the Super Nintendo has more fighting games on it that are of higher quality than the Sega Genesis. Outside of a few games, like the original Mortal Kombat was probably better on the Genesis than it was on the Super Nintendo. But as kind of the 16-bit era, or the early 90s, or however you want to call it, I don't know if it's necessarily like honorable mentions, but the TurboGrafx and the PC Engine, as always, because I pay so much freaking attention to that, had a ton of really good fighting games that had come out around the mid 90s, like 93 to 96, or 93 to 95, I mean. And they had a conversion of Fatal Free Special. They also had Art of Fighting and World Heroes 1 and 2. Yeah, World Heroes 1 and 2. And then they actually had a couple exclusive ones. One was Martial Champion, which was a Konami fighting game, and Kabuki Clash, which was a Far East of Eden game. That was another really good one on the PC Engine. But again, that's like probably less than 10 games. I mean, there was also Godzilla, which was a decent fighting game, and a few other ones that were pretty good. But I think my choice for that time period of the best fighting games systems would have to go to the Neo Geo,
Yeah.
which might be cheating because it was arcade and home at the same time. But SNK,
Man, I wish I had more access to the Neo Geo, like the
library.
game library. Yeah, it.
What
I
you should
just
do is
didn't.
you should look for some of those like compilation discs. There's like there was a few on the PS2 towards the end, and then there was also like some on the newer generation consoles. I think the Wii and the 360 and the PS3 had like SNK Arcade Classics Volume 1 and stuff like that. And there was a whole,
Seriously.
yeah, there was like 20 games on each one of those. Those are really good ways to get a hold of those types of games.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Samurai Showdown, Fatal Fury, World Heroes, Art of Fighting, Galaxy Fight, Double Dragon. That actually came up with a decent Double Dragon game on the Neo Geo. That was a fighting game. Then there was a sort of
Nice.
yeah, and then there was a pseudo sequel called Rage of Dragons. There was the Power, what's it called? Power League? No, it's not called Power League. Anyway, Matra Melee is a really funny fighting game. But yeah, the Neo Geo is just loaded. And then all the King of Fighters. You got King of Fighters 94 all the way to 2000
Yeah.
or 2002 or something like that.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff. And that's like my favorite. King of Fighters is probably my favorite fighting game series ever.
Nice.
But, and then we moved into the 32-bit / 64-bit era. What are some games that you enjoyed out of that?
Actually, one that I just thought of. It's not exactly a console game. Have you ever heard of the game One Must Fall 2097?
No, I haven't.
It was a PC game, and it was robots battling other robots. And it was a fighting game, and you could actually upgrade your robots. It was very interesting. It was released in '94. And I remember I got a demo of it, and I loved it, and then I bought the full game. It's a crazy one-off fighting game that never had a sequel, it never had anything else. It was just its own standalone little thing.
Wow.
Yeah, but check it out if you ever get a chance.
I will definitely have to check that out. And one that I actually forgot to mention was Waku Waku 7.
Waku Waku 7.
Yes. It's a fantastic Neo Geo fighting game.
Nice.
It's actually developed by Sunsoft, who are one of my favorite
Yeah.
bit developers. They made games like Blaster Master and Batman and some other really good ones.
Mm-hmm.
32-bit era. So you're coming into the PlayStation now with the Sega Saturn and the N64, which had some okay fighting games for a little while. Like Killer Instinct Gold came out on the N64.
Yeah.
Yeah, War Gods. What else? Jesus, I don't even remember. But it wasn't anything really worth mentioning.
No.
Better ones had come out on the PlayStation, and in my opinion, the Saturn had some really good ones. The Saturn in Japan got the original Dead or Alive. It also got
Yes.
the Virtua Fighter games, Virtua Fighter 1 and 2,
Yep.
and Virtua Fighter Kids, and Fighting Vipers, and Fighters Megamix,
Yep.
and a whole bunch of good ones.
Yeah.
What are some other ones that you can think of?
The ever sexy Battle Arena Toshinden for the PlayStation 1.
That's a good game.
No.
It was funny,
I loved the posters as a teenager.
right?
They
Yep.
were great, but then it's like you actually play it and it's like, yeah, her boobs are square. That's nice.
Yeah, it was funny because they had really pushed that, like that was a big deal.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing the commercials thinking, oh my God, like this looks amazing. And the first couple times I'd played it, I actually have the Battle Arena Toshinden URA Ultimate or Revenge Attack on the Saturn, and I played it a couple times, and it's not awful.
No,
but
it's not that bad.
Really weird. It's just like this isn't much of a fighting game. It's just luck. Like you're just button mashing and hoping something happens. In comparison to things like your Virtua Fighters and your
Yeah.
DOA and your Tekkens. I mean, it's really terrible.
I hate the games where you can be an experienced player and button mashing can actually win. It shouldn't ever be able to do that. Like,
So
I
Smash
mean,
Brothers.
yeah, yes and no.
What are your thoughts on Smash Brothers?
I like Smash Brothers. I like it. It's fun.
Is it a different
Um,
category though?
yes, 100%. It is not a fighting game, in my opinion.
I
I
agree.
I don't think it is at all. And it's like, and I'm not even kidding. I've wanted to go to so many fighting game tournaments, and I'm like, hey, how about some Marvel versus Capcom 2? Or hey, how about something that takes some skill? And everybody's like, Smash Brothers, bro. Let's do it. And while I realize it takes some skill to be good at Smash Brothers, and I would like to think I've gotten good at Smash Brothers, there's a certain button mashing element in it that just rubs me the wrong way. I
Yeah.
can't take it. I
Well,
like
and
playing against my friends, and I love kicking the shit out of my friends. It's really fun. But it just, I don't know. It's not a fighting game. It's an entertaining game, but it's not a fighting game in any
yeah,
way.
it's very different. It's got a little bit of party gameness to it.
Yes.
And it's interesting that Smash Brothers there was and I cannot remember one of the names of the games, but there was a game that came before the N64 Smash Brothers that played very similar to it. And when Smash Brothers came out, it was just this fun party game. There was a storyline mode, and it wasn't like as big as it is now at all. A lot of people enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty neat. But on the Sega Dreamcast, after Smash Brothers came out, they had a game series that had two games in it, and it was called Power Stone. And the original Power Stone was a very straightforward 4-on-4 3D fighting game. And the second one, they introduced a ton of like platforming that kind of came along with it, and the ability to knock people off of platforms and then knock them off into nothingness or whatever, and defeating them that way. And when Smash Brothers Melee came out on the GameCube, they had really done their research and looked at Power Stone 2 and took a lot of those ideas. I'm not saying it copied them, because Power Stone kind of took their ideas to begin with. But Power Stone 2 is a game to really, it's a really fun game. It's on the Dreamcast, made by Capcom. And if you're a fan of Smash Brothers, that's one to really look at, because it's actually more of a fighting game. You've got kicks, punches, you got moves, you can do supers
Nice.
and all kinds of stuff. And it plays very similar to Smash Brothers, except for it's in 3D.
Nice.
But some of the platforming stuff that they throw in is just crazy. Like you're fighting in this open arena, and all of a sudden like a volcano erupts, and like all that you're standing in is covered in lava, and you have to jump up this mountain. And it's like all four of you guys are trying to do the same thing, and you just punch someone. Like the last guy punches the first guy, and the guy falls off into the lava, and it's just really fun.
Nice.
It's very similar to Smash Brothers, but that's a good one too. But yeah, the 32-bit era, I didn't think much of fighting games on the PlayStation, and I know a lot of people liked DOA. You're a big Dead or Alive guy, aren't you?
I'm a big Dead or Alive 2 fan and on.
Okay. That was a good game on the Dreamcast also.
Yes, it was phenomenal. That was the first I played it, actually, was on the Dreamcast.
That's awesome.
Oh my goodness, that was such, I couldn't believe it. And I mean, aside from all of the stupid boobage that was on.
Stupid boobs, get off my game.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, sure, it's fun. But I mean, come on. Like in any of the DOA games, they focus on that a lot, and it's seriously stupid, because the games themselves can stand on their own without all of that. Like, ugh. It's so dumb, because it's like, look at how hot these girls are. You can play this game, and I'm just like, it doesn't need it. It's nice. Don't get me wrong. Do they really need to jiggle independently? No. the counter system more than makes up for that. Like, they are legit fighting games where if you actually have one skilled opponent against another skilled opponent, it like my friend Kevin and I used to play him all the time, and he was extremely good, and he knew all the moves list, and I was pretty good, but not as good as he was. And he would just dominate me every time because his mechanics were better. And it had nothing to do with the boob jiggle features, but it was a game that was so mechanically sound. And all the fighters had different styles, different speeds, different moves. They were great.
You are living in denial, and it was all the boob physics.
All right, it was all the boobs. I'm sorry.
It was all the boob physics. Yeah,
Okay.
DOA took it way too far. I don't know why they did that. It's interesting too because there was a lot of fighting games companies that wound up pretty much going as almost as ridiculous, but DOA is like tops. Like, it's so odd how
Yeah.
they went after that like teenager or young male demographic so hardcore, with everything that they were pulling there.
It was so weird because they didn't need to. They had a great game.
Yep.
Like I mean, even Dead or Alive 5, that one was tough, but it's still good.
Yeah.
But it's like, why in the world are you selling a DLC swimsuit pack? Really?
There was that DOA Dead or Alive beach volleyball game.
Oh yeah, 1 and 2.
There was 1 and 2, yeah.
I heard there was for the PS Vita, I think it was.
Wow, I can't even imagine. I don't know why they do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yes, DOA is good. The series is good. Tekken, a lot of people are in love with Tekken. I gotta give you a little bit of a confession here. Tekken came out for me when I saw it in an arcade for the first time. I saw Tekken 2, and maybe it was Tekken 1.
Nice.
I think it was actually Tekken 1, and I saw it in an arcade, and I had already played Virtua Fighter 2. I had a Sega Saturn at home. I was working on. Yay! Look at that. We both were Saturn owners.
Yep.
Saturn, good system, underrated.
Awesome.
It's too bad that it didn't last as long as it should have, but whatever.
Loved Street Fighter, the movie, the game.
Oh, that's right. We're going through all the Street Fighters. Street Fighter, the movie, the game. That was an awesome one.
It actually wasn't a bad game, but anyway.
It's not. It's not a bad game. But no. I'd wondered why someone, or like, I thought that Tekken was a spin-off of Virtua Fighter because it just looked just like it. It was like
really
all the moves were the same. The when you're in a fight and you lose, that continue sign or insert quarter sign, like the text was the same, and it would just zoom away from your character laying on the ground, and it was like, this is the exact same game. How this cheap knockoff of Virtua Fighter be like available? How could Sega even allow this to happen?
Who are the producers of both of them? Just out of curiosity.
That's Namco. Namco has Namco has a weird addiction to being Sega's like sloppy seconds. Namco, it's weird. Sega does Daytona USA. Namco does Ridge Racer. Sega does Virtua Fighter. Namco does Tekken. And it just keeps going on and on. Sega does Virtua Cop. Namco does Time Killer or Time Cruise. What's it called? Time. Damn it! There's Zapper game. They're light gun.
Yeah, it was.
It's Time something, isn't it? Wow, I can't remember.
It was.
Anyway, and they signed an exclusive deal to make games for the PlayStation.
Time Cop? No.
No, that's a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, which is a fantastic flick.
Is it?
Time. Jeez, I feel like a dork.
Oh shoot.
Googles, don't fail me now. Anyway, yeah, so it was like Tekken came out, and I know a lot of people.
Time Crisis.
Time Crisis, that's it. Yeah, there you go. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
a lot of people jumped on the Tekken bandwagon when Tekken 3 came out because Tekken 3 was a really good game, and a lot of people that were on Sega's, bandwagon at the time kind of were left in the dust because Virtua Fighter 3 was sort of a letdown. And it was only available in arcades for a really long time. They decided to pass on making a home conversion for the Sega Saturn because the Dreamcast was in development. They wanted to bring it onto the Dreamcast. So they waited from like 96 to 99 without any Virtua Fighter games. And we kind of sat there waiting while Tekken 3 was just stealing the thunder, and everyone was in love with Tekken 3. And I can understand why. Tekken 3 is a very good game. They finally fixed all of the issues with it. But once Sega had come out with Virtua Fighter 4 on the PlayStation 2, I think they upped it. They upped everything. Like all of the gameplay elements were amazing. The balance of all the characters was perfect. The transition from move to another move and how you can do a move and you could do another move, and then you could figure out a way to chain them together by making a fluid motion between two different moves. Wow. Like Virtua Fighter 4, in my opinion, is one of the best 3D fighting games I've ever seen.
I remember that was a very fun one.
It's good. There was Virtua Fighter 4, and then there was Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution. So they had two different versions on the PlayStation 2. It was an exclusive thing for the PS2. And man, it's good. I mean, I know the Xbox had Dead or Alive 3, but the PlayStation had PlayStation 2 had Virtua Fighter.
Dead or Alive 3 was
Really?
I mean, compared to Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore?
Yeah, on the Dreamcast.
Was Hardcore
PlayStation
on the Dreamcast or the PS2?
It came out on the PS2 in US, and it actually did get a Dreamcast release in Japan.
Okay. Yeah, that was actually my favorite of the Dead or Alive series.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I felt after that they just kind of kept getting ridiculous because the bosses, the end bosses, were so stupid.
Yeah.
I mean, they were and that's one thing that I absolutely hate in fighting games is when they have a good thing going with a series and they will develop a fighting game that is both fun and challenging. And if you're an expert at the game and you know the moves list, right, you can defeat pretty much any, especially computer enemy, on any difficulty because you know the combos, you know the moves, you know their weaknesses, you know when they're starting to strike that you can make a counter strike and counter their move and kick them up in the air and beat the living crap out of them for 16 moves and drain half their life bar and it's done. But in newer fighting games, it's not like that because you go through the whole freaking game and you're like, yeah, I'm dominating because I already know all these moves. And yeah, there are a few new ones that I've experimented with and they're super fun. But all of a sudden you get to the end boss and it's like, by the way, I have arms like Dalsum. I shoot fire out of my nose. And by the way, I can polymorph into any of your former enemies and shoot all of their fireballs. So good luck, douchebag. But it's dumb. It's not even a challenge at that point. It's are you going to get lucky enough to beat the crap out of the end boss with the moves that you've beaten 12 of the past people with? It's silly. It annoys me.
Yeah, man. You can almost do an entire rant about bosses in video games, fighting game bosses. I remember, God, the first time I fought Goro in Mortal Kombat.
God.
Yeah.
He can stomp on the ground, and as long as you're standing there, you're kind of effed.
Yeah. You have to take him out fast, otherwise he just gets so cheap so fast. And it was like, oh man. Mortal Kombat with Goro, and some of the times if you amped up the difficulty in a Street Fighter game, man, good luck with M. Bison because he can get pretty tough too.
Oh yeah.
But man,
I can't stand. There's challenging and there's cheap.
Yep.
And I do not like cheap because then it becomes the luck of the draw, and then you're fighting for achievements, you're fighting for like
Yeah.
unlocking costumes or whatever else. It's just, and as you stated before, I was all about the Dead or Alive costumes.
Of
Let's
course.
face it. But
Yeah.
it's just it's annoying. It's no longer skill versus the computer has every advantage and good luck.
Yeah.
Yay.
So, okay, to transition from 2D fighting games to 3D fighting games. When we were in the 16-bit era, there weren't really any 3D fighting games. That was something
Mhm.
that kind of came to be with the progression of the polygons and 3D graphics in games, and the growth of what video games graphics were capable of. It all started kind of with Virtua Fighter. There was a few other fighting
Yeah.
games that had come out. Um, what would you say you preferred? I mean, we're getting close to about the end of the show anyway, but I figured we could throw out some parting shots here on some opinions on this. 2D fighters are still going strong.
Yep.
There's some games that are those kind of pseudo 3D slash 2D fighters. I think like the King of Fighters series is in 3D, like with polygons, but they still play 2D style. And that's King of Fighters. I think 14 is coming out pretty soon.
Yeah.
Gosh, yeah, it's kind of crazy. I actually have King of Fighters 98 Dream Match playing in the background here. Was one of the launch titles for the Dreamcast, one of my favorite King of Fighters games. But it's interesting that a game series, even when 3D fighting was so huge in like the late 90s and early 2000s, King of Fighters just kept going with the 2D games, just like, no, we're not changing anything, and just kept going with the 2D games. But what would you say, I'm babbling here a little bit, but 3D versus 2D, what's your opinion?
Honestly, I've always been more of a fan of the 2D, um, or the 3D games that play like a 2D.
Sure.
Um, where the most that you can really do in a 3D fighter, like the Soul Calibur series. I mean, honestly, you have your horizontal attacks and your vertical attacks, but the most you can really do is sidestep and then horizontal attack,
Yep.
which it pretty much, I mean, it plays like a 2D fighter. It really does.
Yep.
Same with the Dead or Alive series. They all play like 2D fighters. That's the focus, but they have some 3D aspects that you can use for strategy. Um, but 2D fighters have always been my favorite because, well, that's what I grew up with.
Yep.
And the Street Fighter series, that's, yeah, my absolute favorite Street Fighter game is Marvel vs. Capcom 2.
Nice.
With all the unlocks, and just the vast array of characters. Um, and one of my favorite moments was playing that game. I was on a snowboarding trip in Michigan, and some kid was like, "Oh my gosh, is that Marvel vs. Capcom 2?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I still had my snowboard on, and he saw it through the window, and he's like, "I love that game." I'm like, "Me too." And we ended up playing. We spent like, I don't even know how much money, but we popped so much money into that quarter machine. It was awesome. But yeah, so I would say 2D fighters are my bag.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I absolutely love 2D fighting games. Um, God, it's interesting. There was actually one of the later released Neo Geo games, was Art of Fighting 3, Path of the
Ooh,
Warrior, I think it was called. And SNK had gone through a long spurt of like making sequels to fighting games, just tons of them. And for whatever reason, Art of Fighting was people that were fans of Art of Fighting were asking for a sequel to Art of Fighting 2, and SNK didn't want to. So when they came out with Art of Fighting 3, I mean, they didn't want to, but they did, just to like appeal to everyone. And they apparently, this is the rumor, that they came out with Art of Fighting 3 with a completely just swiped the engine altogether and just started from scratch. And they used an experimental engine that was called like, it was more for throwing and grappling. And
nice.
Yeah, it's very strange. There's not as many. You have some of the same characters, but they don't use like projectiles. They have a few, but they're harder to pull off, and it's better just to get close and just fight, like wrestle and fight and grapple. And
Interesting.
they made a 2D fighter that played more like a 3D fighter. So like
That's really cool.
you had the dodges, you had the just defended, you have grapples, grabs, and you have several different throws you can do with them. And when you knock down a character, you can actually duck down and punch them while they're on the ground. It was really weird, and
Nice.
it didn't receive a ton of like fanfare at all. But that's what SNK kind of wanted. They were like, "Well, thank God, you guys are going to stop buying them now, or so we don't have to make these anymore," because they just didn't want to make them anymore for whatever reason. And the people that were big fans of it really enjoyed it a lot, and it actually is a really good fighting game and a much better game than Art of Fighting 2 was.
Awesome.
And I just thought that was interesting because we were talking about 3D games that play like 2D games. Well, Art of Fighting 3 is a 2D game that plays more like a 3D game.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I also prefer the 16-bit era, or I shouldn't say 16-bit, but 2D fighters in general. I think that games now, you have like Axis is making like BlazBlue, and the Guilty Gear games are big. Yeah, you're not a big fan of Guilty Gear? I think they're pretty good.
I think they're fun, but they're not that strategic.
Sure. Are you a fan of Rumblefish?
I don't know Rumble.
You'll have to Google it. Anyway, yeah, there's a certain flavor to the 2D games that I just generally prefer more. I think there's more variety. There's more you can do with it. A 2D fighter, I've seen games that have tried to play more like a 2D fighter using a 3D engine. I've seen like 3D games that are really, really good for like grappling and more realistic style fighting. And if that's what you're into, that's what you're going to be into, is the 3D stuff. But I prefer 2D. I think some of my favorite all-time fighting games are like Capcom versus SNK 2, I think is the best 2D fighting game I've ever played. It's so well done.
It's a fantastic game.
And then like my favorite 3D fighters would either be Virtua Fighter 2 on the Saturn or Virtua Fighter 4 on the PlayStation 2. And as an honorable mention, I would say also, oh shoot, I blanked. It was there on the tip of my tongue. Oh, Soul Calibur on the Dreamcast was really good too.
Yes.
A lot of people don't like it. I mean, once you play it for like, I remember I got it on launch day with the Dreamcast, and I played it for like a week, and I did not get sick of it once. But after you do play it like hardcore that long, you can sort of run into a wall where you just kind of learn everything, you can unlock everything, you play all the quest modes, and each character doesn't necessarily have the most depth to it, but it's cool because it's one of those games that you can put down and then come back 2-3 months later and still be really good at it.
Was Mitsurugi in Soul Calibur 1?
Yes, he was.
Yeah. But so
Mitsurugi was good.
He's actually my favorite, like in any of the Soul Calibur games.
Yeah, he's awesome. Yeah, I preferred the original Soul Calibur to all of those sequels that wound up coming out for all the other systems.
And my favorite is Soul Calibur 2.
On which system?
Actually, the Xbox 360 was the one that I played it on a bunch. But I also played it on the PS2 and the GameCube. I own all three versions.
To have all those characters, huh?
Yeah. And Soul Calibur 2 was a game, it was absolutely amazing. My two of my friends, Jacob and Kevin, we would get together at Kevin's apartment and we would play it, and it was always the loser passes the controller off.
Nice.
And we would play for hours. And the controller kept getting passed around. We would play as just random characters all the time. It was so much fun because there was never a clear winner. Like there wasn't one of us that was better than the other two guys. The controllers just kept getting passed around over and over and over. And my buddy attended a tournament in Green Bay, and he called me up right after, and he said he wished I was there because then he would have actually had a challenger. Because
nice.
he just rocked it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, Soul Calibur 2. It was so much fun.
Yeah, the GameCube one had Link.
Yep.
And the Xbox version had Spawn,
Spawn. Yep.
and the PlayStation 2 version had
Hihachi, I believe.
it is a Tekken character, right?
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty neat.
It was fun. I love how all the Soul Calibur games added characters in each of their releases. Their releases did keep getting weaker and weaker, but eh.
Yeah, it happens, I guess.
At least one of them had Darth Vader. I think it was 3.
Oh, geez, yeah. I think you're right. Yeah. That's perfect. Awesome. Totally makes sense.
So that's a plus.
That is definitely a plus. So here, okay, we're in closing now. What would be, in as a last kind of comment here out of you, Mr. Ryan, what would be some of your, or maybe your favorite fighting game, or a couple of your favorite fighting of all time?
Favorite fighting games of all time? Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore. Super Street Fighter 2 for the SNES. Well, yeah, that one, and Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition for the Genesis. Is it Champion or Championship?
There was Special Championship Edition.
Special Championship. Yep. Because that one I actually played the most out of any of the Street Fighter games, because I had my Genesis and I played it all the time.
Nice.
Yeah. And let's see. Yeah, Soul Calibur 2 is in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say those would be my favorites.
Nice. That's really cool. Yeah.
And Samurai Showdown.
Ooh, yeah. Sam Show for show. Well, that's awesome, man. I am really glad that you got to come out and hang out tonight, talk about some fighting games. And listen, look at that. We didn't even get in an argument this time.
So Mad Max Fury Road.
That's a great movie. I couldn't possibly imagine anyone to have any sort of different opinion than that. Whoever would probably be someone that would be bad, I'm sure. But yeah, thank you so much for coming out.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having you, Ryan. On the show, Game Huggers, that's facebook.com/GameHuggers. You can check us out there. You can also check us out on the YouTubes and also on Podomatic.com for those fortunate enough to be listening to us on Podomatic today. That's Podomatic.gamehuggers.com or gamehuggers.podomatic.com. I can't remember how it goes. But also you can, if you have any questions for me or for Ryan, I'm sure he's got a way to contact him in other ways. But if you want to contact me about the show or being a part of the show or questions for the show, you can always tweet at me at _Joshua Turbo. Anyway, thank you guys so much for being here, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their weeks. Ta-ta for now.
Later.